The big day is only 2 weeks away, and hopefully you've been able to make some of your Christmas gifts this year. We've been taking a look at things to help decorate the house, some useful things that would make nice gift ideas for most of the adults on your list, but we haven't really made any toys. So today I thought we would make a toy, specifically one requested by Steel Penny Forge, and that is the classic cup and ball toy, where you throw the wooden ball up in the air attached to a string and then try and catch it in a little cup. Now the standard pipe candle cup works very well for this as long as you make it match the wooden ball. And I say wooden ball because this is something that as you do this, you're going to miss more often than you succeed. And a steel ball bearing of this size whacking you in the wrist or in the finger isn't going to be much fun. So I think it's probably better to use a little bit of wood in this project and make the rest of it out of iron. The wooden balls that I found online are 1.25 inches in diameter. Of course, you can use something else. I think this is a pretty good size. Too small and they get too light and they're going to be really hard to control, and too big it just gets to be a massive project. So 1.25 inches is something like 32 millimeters. And I have this candle cup that I made previously that it just kind of drops in the top of. But I found this piece of pipe that's been scrapped off of some other project, and it fits all the way down that, and I think that might be a better size pipe. So this is what we're going to go ahead and make our cup out of. For the handle, you can do anything you want. We've done a lot of stuff out of square bars with twists, things like that. So this time I'm going to do more of a round handle, something a little bit different, and I'm going to start with a piece of 3/4 inch round bar. The length doesn't matter. I know this is too much bar, so I'll start at one end, forge the handle part, then I'll forge the taper that goes into the cup, and cut it off when I get to where I want it to be. We have looked many times in the past at necking down a pipe in a spring fuller or a fullering jig. So today I thought I would just taper this right here at the step of the anvil. I'm doing this so it's supported at the bottom and at the side. You could do this in a big swedge or swedge block that has an appropriate depression in it. Just another option. And this is some place where I don't worry about the square octagon round rule. Otherwise the pipe puckers out and forms corners that are really hard to get out of it. This will take a few heats. So take your time. And sooner or later you get just what you're looking for. Now this definitely takes longer than doing it in a swedge, but I think you've got much more control over what the final shape will be. And I think it may end up being a little bit cleaner as well. Let it cool and take it to the chop saw, and I'm just going to cut it off right about there. So here's our little cup. I want to say candle cup, but it's not going to have any candles in it. And I cut it off on the chop saw so it's ragged on the inside. So before we do anything with this end, I'm just going to take a die grinder. And knock the rag off on the inside. I really like this battery operated Milwaukee die grinder. I've been real impressed with it so far. Now I don't want to make this toy too hard to use, and even though you can get the ball in there, I think flaring this out just like we do a candle cup would be a good idea. And because it's no longer attached to a pipe due to doing this in first, we're going to take a little bit different approach to it and actually drive it down onto a ball tool. So I think I'll use one of the ball tools I made for our Jingle Bell project. And I can probably just put that there and do it. I can drop it in the hardy hole. Although I think with this in there that would be better. And I think that'll be perfect for that. I'll probably cool this end off when we do that so I don't continue to crush that any more than I have to. So be careful quenching this in, that you don't have this pointed at your face just in case it squirts hot steam out when you do it. This small of a cup probably won't, but it might. You can see that's flaring that very nicely. Now I'm going to go to an 1 7/8" ball. This is actually just a trailer hitch that the threaded shank with the threads ground off fits in my pritchel hole. I may start doing all my candle cups this way. I'm pretty impressed with how that came out. So I'm going to start by just butchering in and defining some areas on what's going to be the handle. And I'm making this up kind of as I go, so I can't really tell you exactly what I'm doing. But there'll be a little finial here, and some sort of a handle, and something that corresponds to the finial down here, and then it'll taper it up to the ball. But exactly what that looks like, I can't tell you at the moment. I don't want to butcher in too deep. I don't want it thin and spindly. So I think that's about right. That leaves me about a 1/2 inch inside there. So to match, I'm going to turn the butcher around. Decide about how much handle I want. And create a corresponding butcher there. And I'll do one more butcher to set another ring in here that matches the finial. And I'm going to define that. This is some place where I use that square, octagon, round philosophy to do the butchering. I butcher in square, then I knock the corners down, and then I come in and round it up. So I don't want to leave the handle just like this. I want to feather this butcher in to the middle on both sides. So I'll do that next. And then here I'm going to want to draw this out considerably at this point. I'm going to taper this in. And that butcher line gives me a place I can work right up to. And as always, it's square, then octagon. And then you decide, are you going to go around again, or am I going to leave it octagon? I'm right now leaning towards leaving that handle octagonal. This is going to require a little bit of finesse to not mess up those ends. If you're going to do this, make sure your octagon's the same on both ends. I'm not going to twist it. So there's a little bit more work to be done there. And I think this is something that what I see in my head, I'm going to have no hesitation whatsoever cleaning up with a belt grinder. So if you don't have a belt grinder and don't want to file, what I'm planning on doing here might be better off not done. But if you have a belt grinder, you don't mind filing, or even using an angle grinder, I think we can come up with a pretty nice little octagonal handle here. Probably also be pretty easy if you're going to do a lot of these to make power hammer or press dies. But we'll see. See how I like that handle. If I really like it, it might become a good handle for fireplace tools. Now this is incredibly rough, but since I'm going to allow myself the luxury of a belt grinder, I'm not too worried about it. Now I'm just working this into a ball, I think. Like I say, I'm making some of this up as I go. 5 minutes from now, I might have a different idea. I also see some potential here, if you're into Harry Potter movies, for making forged iron wands. This will be kind of a squished ball. It would have needed to leave a little bit more mass to get a perfect ball shape, but that's okay. And I think we've got this pretty well defined so that we can clean the octagon up on the grinder. So now let's come down and work on the shaft part, and I'll just draw that out starting here until it's as long as I think it needs to be. And I probably don't need to draw very much out. I'm really thinking in the long run about 12 inches total is plenty long enough. So I'm just going to be as careful as I can not to mess this up. I may butcher this side in a little bit more, we'll see. This, I think, doesn't need to be any bigger than about 3/8 round. Definitely should be smaller than the handle end. I'll just go ahead and do that. Don't go too deep though. You don't want to butcher quite as deep as what you want it in the long run. You want to have to forge that last little bit, or it's a good way to end up with a cold shut. I think I'm going to go ahead and cut that off. You say, I think 12 inches in the long run, that's about 4 there. This is going to draw out and probably double. So I think I'm going to cut it off right about here and see what we get. And I'll get this hot again to finish it. This may still be more material than we need in the long run. Better not to have this stuff flying around the shop, so if you can break it off, you're better off. I'm going to fuller in at the end to leave a fat spot that'll join the cup. And since I'm going to make this rod round, we'll round this up. Then I just need to draw out between the fuller and the butcher. So something like that. Now this is something that doesn't span the anvil and will be really easy to ruin if I get it up here and hit it. But it does span this little section between the edge and the hardy hole. So that's a good place to start. And it wouldn't be bad to work it over the horn. Now you can see this is bending. Now this is cold enough, I don't want to try and straighten it. This is a good place for a stress crack to develop, so I want to get that hot before I straighten it. So now's a good time to straighten that. Now this side's getting too long for the hardy hole. So in a minute, we probably will go to the horn. As long as I keep that up in the air, I'm okay. This is where a 2-horn anvil would come in really handy, because this would span the taper of a 2-horn anvil. You know, kind of like this one I got to walk across the shop to get to. Of course, it's louder. But it's very good for this kind of a thing. So to save you the pain of listening to that anvil, we'll work over the horn here. And we're working square, but once it's close to length and size, we'll go octagon and then round. And at some point, this will also span the face of my bigger anvil here. I'm also letting this taper a little bit lengthwise. Not a lot, just enough that it looks graceful. Yeah, that spans the face of the anvil, so now we'll clean it up and then round it up. I'm going to start with a couple of tenoning dies that are actually a little bit big for what I'm doing. But that's just to create a nice, smooth transition right at that shoulder. I'm not worried as much about using them to size the shoulder. Just keeps me from messing it up by trying to get my hammer in there. And that just helps define that, and then I'll finish this up at the anvil. I just clean up the taper. Make sure there's no fat spots, lumps, or bumps. After all, it's not a self-portrait. And we're going octagon. And then round. Again, all of this is just up to you. That's pretty much what I want for the handle end. Now we need to be able to attach our cup, so I'm going to put a tenon on this end. So I will start that tenon by butchering in. And again, don't butcher as to the size you want it. Leave it a little oversized and work it in some other way. I actually kind of like that little detail right there. I have to remember that for some other project. And then I'll draw that out under a set of tenoning dies. And this time I do want to go to the limit of the dies. Square, octagon, round. This may take a few heats. Definitely more material there than I need. Once the dies come together square, then you can go to the octagon. And really, I don't need to work this whole tenon. 3/4 of an inch, which is the thickness of the dies, is more than enough length. So I'm just going to let that have a little blob on the end, because I'm going to have to cut it off anyways. Now, if you're watching this and you're thinking, wow, I wish he would talk more about this tool. This is a guillotine tool. This particular one is a brand called a Smithing Magician, and we've done videos on these in the past, and I'll put a link up in this corner somewhere to some of those videos. So that's really all that needs. Like I say, I'll trim that to fit. And that's about the right size. We'll need to drill the hole in the cup out. and then we'll figure out how we're going to attach it. Right now I'm leaning towards welding with the torch, just to avoid the hassles you get trying to set a rivet down inside here. But with the right tool to support this in the vise, you certainly could rivet this. But I don't have a vise jaw insert designed for this type of a use, so I'm thinking welding with the torch is probably what I'm going to do. But I'm going to let this cool. I'm going to go to lunch, and I'll meet you right back here after lunch. Okay, this is cooled off quite nicely, and I took it to the belt grinder and I ground the octagonal handle much cleaner. It's still not perfect. I've got a few weird facets because I didn't hold it quite right on the grinder, but it's quite a nice handle. I'm pretty happy with that. I may look at figuring out how to do a cleaner forging job on these and use that design for fireplace pokers and such. But since I cleaned this up so nicely, I got a little carried away. I went ahead and cleaned up the cup as well. I still need to do a little filing on this and perhaps drill this out to make sure it's perfectly round. And then I can assemble that. By the way, I had made a comment that this was starting to look like a Harry Potter style magic wand. And I see that in this even more since I've cleaned up the forging. I think that's another possible gift idea if you've got somebody that's into that kind of stuff. Just leave off the little bit where the cup is going to mount, and pretty much that's it. Maybe a little bit longer. Just another idea for you enterprising blacksmiths out there. As I had previously mentioned, I'm just going to go ahead and weld this with a torch. I'll get in here and weld that down there and then weld around this edge. And I'm not going to show much of that because I've decided that's what ruined my other camera, was showing arc welding and torch welding and things like that. But I'm not going to set it as a rivet because I would really gouge this up. You could make a special vise insert that held this, and if I was going to make more than one, I think that's exactly what I would do. So I'll see you once I get this welded up. So that's all welded around here. It's a little crooked, so I'm going to put it back in the forge and we're going to straighten that out. And then I'll go back and I'll grind again, mostly because I've ground this and I'd like to keep some consistency in the finish. Now I know that I have really let myself get carried away with this project. I didn't really mean for it to be this refined or this complicated, but sometimes it's fun to just let the day go where it wants to go. So even though this could have been a much simpler project, it's a little complicated. You don't need to go there if you're making your own. And to save time on the video, I chose not to show the grinding, and to save the wear and tear on the sensor in my camera, I chose not to show the welding. But again, you don't need to make it this refined or this complicated. You could put the cup on the end of a square handle with a twist and just rivet it on the end, and it would work great, and we would have been done a long time ago. But I'm having fun, so I hope you're enjoying watching it. I'm going to go see if that's hot and ready to straighten, and we'll get back to it. I'll support the cup part in the swedge there. Just give that a little bit of a straightening out. I think if it's crooked, it gets considerably harder to catch the little wooden ball. I think that looks pretty good. So I'm going to clean that up on the grinder. And then we'll pretty much be done with it. There's one more step that I have to do to this that we haven't talked about. But once I've ground it, we'll talk about it. So I've cleaned this up and modified this transition some so I think it looks a little bit better. But now what do we do with it? It's pretty much finished. You can drop the ball in there. You can throw the ball up in the air and catch it. But the ball has a hole through it for the string, and this does not, which means we just have to tie the string around here somewhere, and I think that would be really tacky. So we need to drill a little hole through here. going to counter bore one side so that my knot can be below the surface. Careful, don't drill all the way through. And finally countersink it, because you don't want any sharp corners that'll cut the string. That would be really fun. That's like not having batteries. We're getting very close to having our ball and cup toy completed. I think I'm going to heat it up and wire brush it one last time. I'm not going to leave it as ground finish, although you certainly could if you chose to get as carried away as I did. So the last thing we need to do is figure how much string we need for this thing. It needs to be enough to be able to swing the ball out and get it to drop in. Too much is obviously a problem. Too short is obviously a problem. I'm going to guess about there, and then I'm going to cut it a little bit long because I'm not 100% sure. And if it's long, you can always readjust it, tie a new knot in it, and make it shorter. Now, just looking at this and the amount of work that went into it, like I say, that's overkill. I never intended to make it this complicated. I'm thinking this one, I might actually try to find a nice, soft buckskin cord to use instead of just a cotton string. But since all I have on hand in the shop is the cotton cord, we're going to go ahead and finish it with that. And then I may have to look online, or if I'm lucky, I got something stashed in the basement. So there we have a bit of an over-the-top toy. Definitely more for the adults in the house, probably, than the kids. They'll probably get tired of it by the end of Christmas Day anyways. Then you can play with it. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. Give it a thumbs up if you did. If you haven't done so already, I'd love it if you hit that subscribe button right below the screen. Stick around, watch a few of the other videos. I did it! Share the videos with your friends. Make time in your day to get out to your shop. Make something, stay safe, have fun, wear your safety glasses, and we'll see you for the next one.